we still
It's been a long time since I saw you. I know, right?
Hey, Judy, you come sit, Leslie. Let's put this stick away.
It's not a long time ago today.
You better?
All right. Am I better? Yeah. I was not moving that night. I was asleep. I was falling asleep on the floor. I didn't even make it to the bed. So it's like, go ahead, sit. Is Levi yelling like a whale?
Turn to number 405. Number 405. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for everyone coming. We come together to worship and to study from God's Word. We appreciate you being here. We're going to sing this song. And then after we sing this song, I'd like to ask Dare if he would word a prayer, and then we'll go to classes. Number 405. Sing them over again to me, wonderful words of life. Let me more of their beauty see, wonderful words of life. Words of life and beauty, teach me faith and duty. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Christ the Blessed One gives to all wonderful words of life. Sinner, listen to the jumping call, wonderful words of life. Also freely given, wooing us to heaven. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Sweetly echo the gospel call, wonderful words of life. Offer pardon and peace to all, wonderful words of life. Jesus, only Savior, sanctified forever. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Let's go with that.
Let's bow. Our God and our Father, as we come before you, Lord, we come, dear Father, with humble hearts, praising and glorifying your holy name, and thanking you, dear Father, for your love for us. We are amazed at your love for us. Your blessings are so rich and wonderful. Your kindness the same. Father, we pray that you will guide us and direct us tonight as we are here to study your word, to sing your praises, and to worship you. Ask, Lord, for your leadership in all that we do. Forgive us, we fail you. Guide us and direct us, we ask. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. The song after the classes will be number 366. 366.
So we've been going through the narrative story of the Bible on Wednesday nights, and we've kind of put a little bit of a break on it, not a pause, but a slowdown. I want to take a little bit more time going through the book of Esther. A couple of weeks ago, we did a just reading of the book. We read the book from start to finish, and it took right at our class period to read through the whole book. Esther is an incredible book that often gets relegated to ladies' classes and ladies' studies because the main character is female, but there is so much in this book that we can learn. What are some of the things that we mentioned last time that makes Esther so unique in the Bible?
God is mentioned.
There's not only no mention of God, but there's no mention of anything really religious, not even prayer. It's odd that there's fasting, and for what purpose? Is there a big fast that Esther calls for? If it's not for a spiritual purpose, then I guess she just wants everybody to be hungry for some reason. But it's almost deliberately avoiding mentioning God in the book of Esther, and we can have guesses as to why that is. But that is one thing that makes this book very unique. But what you do see in the book of Esther is, even though God isn't mentioned, he's all over the place in this book. And how it is written is the style that is used. Yes, it is definitely inspired of God and is God breathed. But what makes this book so neat is all of the literary devices that the author uses to tell the story. It makes it memorable, it makes it helpful, and it makes it funny. There's a lot of humor in the book of Esther, and a lot of it comes from being ironic. If you like irony, this is the book for you. There is irony everywhere, just dripping off of the page, and you even see it some in this first chapter. So I want to go through and cover chapter 1 for sure. We may not spend as much time in chapter 1 as we do the rest of the chapters because chapter 1 is really setting the scene. So I want to start in chapter 1. We read it a couple of weeks ago, but let's read these first 12 verses again. Can you get a volunteer to read the chapter 1 verses 1 through 12? Go ahead.
Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes, the provinces being before him, and the princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars. And the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household, that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him.
So right off the bat, what is this? The chapter is building up Ahasuerus, talking about his great power and authority. How rich is this guy? Starting in verse 1, he rules over 127 provinces. That seems like a large amount, right? 127 provinces. It would be like, which is more impressive to say if you have no concept of what the United States is that Donald Trump is president over 50 states, or he's president over it's like 3,500 counties, right? It's the same area, but 3,500, wow. He's president over a huge number. That's similar to this, but he uses the bigger number to say that, instead of 3, I forget the word that's used of like territories, but 127 provinces. And he ran from his royal throne in his fortress. Look how powerful he is and how much authority he has. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he holds this feast. Now, how does Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, become into power? From history is he doesn't conquer a bunch of kingdoms. It's the last guy dies and he becomes king. This is somewhat supported by history, but when you are ruling over lots of kingdoms, right, and your nation has conquered lots of kingdoms, and now you're sending tribute to the main place, but that king dies, and a new king reigns in his place, and you don't know if he's powerful or not, now's the time to rebel and stop paying tribute. So a lot of times what would happen would be when one king dies and his successor becomes in power, a lot of the countries that would be under them would rebel. So a lot of times they would spend the first couple of years of their reign squashing any rebellions, making all people pay tribute. And now it's in the 3rd year of Ahasuerus, and it's time to relax and party. How long does this first party last? 180 days. Wait, a year is 362, so this is a half a year he's throwing this feast. And when that feast ends, he throws another feast that lasts for 7 days. And it tells you about all the pretty stuff that's going on in his palace. And in the book, it talks about how archaeologists have found the remains of Xerxes' palace and have verified the accuracy of the opulence described in verse 6. That over and over again, this man is powerful, this man has authority, he rules to the point where he can just relax and party. And in verse 8, we have one of the only 2 decisions that Ahasuerus makes on his own without first someone suggesting it. That's how it's portrayed in the book. And what is the decree he makes in verse 8? What was that? Yeah, there are no restrictions. Yeah, his only decree, he's only going to make 2 decisions completely on his own in the book. Now, history paints Ahasuerus and Xerxes as this incredible, powerful man who is militarily very smart, and but the book of Esther paints him as a buffoon. There's just really no way to say it other than this. The book of Esther is not lying, but it is painting a picture for a purpose. It is telling the truth, showing his mistakes, the stupid decisions that he makes for a purpose. And right here, it shows one of his decrees that he makes. One of the only 2 decisions that he has is there are no rules. That everybody can drink as much as they want. There's no limit to how much you drink. What do you see in this? In fact, we have a question in the book. The second question: what is the decree in verse 8, and what lessons do we learn from this event? And he makes a rule that everybody can drink as much as they want.
Well, to me, he's got an ego that's,
Oh, of course.
look at me. Look what I've got. Look what I can do.
Absolutely. Like, he is the big shot. He is the one who is the ruler. He's the one who is in charge. And everybody obeys him. And he's been saying everybody can have as much as they want. And the drinks were fancy, served in an array of gold goblets with different designs on each one. Royal wine flowed freely. And there's also a separate feast for the women in verse 9. Now, on the 7th day, when the king was feeling good from the wine, is what my translation says. It is very rare that he makes decisions in the book without also being drunk at the time, that he makes this declare. And it's so interesting to me. He commands 7 eunuchs to go give the queen a message. And not only does he tell 7 eunuchs, we're also given their names of why is it so important that we get the names of these eunuchs. It's an interesting question of why give this detail. And to a Jewish reader, these names would be just as silly sounding to them as they are to us. That, like, which of these names would you like to be called? Would you like to be named Carcass? Or Me Human? Like, there's just a lot of funny names in this, and over again, he's showing his dominance. It tells his 7 eunuchs to go fetch his queen. And after all of this buildup of how much authority and power he has, his own wife tells him no. Like, this is supreme irony that is happening here. And to have Queen Vashti come before him with a royal crown, he wanted to show off her beauty to the people and the officials because she was very beautiful. But she refused to come. And the king became furious, and his anger burns within him. He very much follows whatever feels right in the moment is shown here. There is a question on number 3. Why does Queen Vashti refuse to come before the king? The answer is we don't really know.
Is it just that she didn't want to be shown off, I guess?
Possibly so. It doesn't say for sure, but that is a likely answer. But, and then the lessons, what lessons can wives and single women learn from it? I don't know. What we necessarily can look at Vashti and say, she was a righteous person. She was pagan, just like Ahasuerus was pagan. And worldly people are going to do worldly things.
Well, she must have had some feeling that this was his ego. She was going to get a bunch of drunks looking at her. I don't care how beautiful she is, or how she's dressed, or anything. But would anyone want that? They're all so drunk, they don't know what they're doing anyway.
What this is doing is it's setting up the rest of the book to show how he expects to be obeyed, and also how dangerous the situation that Esther's going to put herself in later in the book. But Queen Vashti here asserts her authority over her husband, king, emperor, and she just flat out says no. And the 7 eunuchs that come to give her the message. How does Ahasuerus feel about this? He is furious. When we think about why he would be furious, is he has now lost face in front of all of his party guests. Is that everybody else is at least my guess is he wants to show off his power. He wants to show off the beauty of his wife, but she tells him no. So here's the first real piece of irony that we have in the book. So now begins where he's starting to go off of the advice of others, starting in verse 13 to the end of the chapter. Someone want to read that chunk for us? Anybody mind doing that? Lynn, do you mind?
No. Then excuse me. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marsina, and Nemucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This very day the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen, thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree which he will make is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house and speak in the language of his own people.
All right, there's a couple of pieces of irony that happen in this chapter. Do any of them pop out at you? Like, what happens in this part that would be ironic? what did the Queen Vashti refuse to do? Is to come before the king. So what is her punishment?
Yeah, but he decided.
Well, I mean, what is in the decree is she doesn't get to come before the king anymore. Like, he essentially gives her what she's asking for. She doesn't want to come before the king? Fine, she doesn't get to come before the king. A little bit.
Her position's taken away too.
But also her position is taken away in this as well. You also have wow, this is going to be known by everyone. So let's tell everyone about it. Like if we don't do anything, this is going to get out and everybody will know about it. So let's tell everyone about it. It seems to be a bit not productive. And in this, the actual decree, he gives a decree that seems to be a little bit odd. What is his decree is that also in Memucan's words, how much he tries to butter up the king. That, wow, this isn't just an affront to you, king, and your power. It's an affront to all men everywhere. What she has done, and if this gets out, then all women are going to start disrespecting their husbands.
But he wasn't the smart one who thought of it.
Yeah.
He wasn't sober enough, maybe. I don't know.
Possibly so. But he's like, before this day is over, they're going to start disrespecting. That they will say the same thing to all the king's officials, resulting in more contempt and fury. It's like he takes what feels as a personal affront, and then he makes it an affront to everyone, so that perhaps the king doesn't see it as much of a personal affront to him, but he's buttering up the king, and then he says, here's this decree. Take her position away from her. Every time up to this point in the chapter, she's been Queen Vashti, Queen Vashti, Queen Vashti, but in verse 19, Vashti is not to enter the king Ahasuerus' presence, that her queenship is taken, and that this decree in verse 20, what is faulty about the decree that we see in verse 20? How would you enforce this? It's like, here's a law that will never be changed. All women are to give honor to their husbands. Yeah, it's things that happen in private, like how would you even know? And it just seems very, very strange to give this type of order. But we're also introduced to this idea of the laws given by the Medes and the Persians cannot be revoked, cannot be changed. You understand why they would make that rule? That once you make a rule, you can't change it, you can't undo it? Why would they do that? Or why is it a bad idea? We can see why it's a bad idea, right? Because sometimes you can make bad laws. But to prevent bad laws from happening, they said, let's make a rule that once we make a rule, we can't change the rule. That way we'll be very, very careful when we make a rule so that we won't make bad ones. You see the logic that would go into making the rule that rules can't be changed? Well, that's...
That you can't undo that.
That you can't undo bad rules, so then you'll be very careful that when you make rules, you won't make bad ones. So bad ones won't be made.
Right.
Yeah, right. Well, obviously, this is going to make a big play in the story later on. So now we are going to be introduced in chapter 2 to two new characters, both Mordecai and Esther. There is, I forget how long the gap is, like 3 years, something like that gap between chapter 1 and chapter 2. This Xerxes goes on a military campaign to fight against Greece. and they lose to 300 soldiers of Greece. This pretty famous story in history that Xerxes loses, and he comes back with his tail tucked, and he gets back home and he realizes, oh, I don't have a queen. So that is the beginning of this story. So let's start reading in verse 1 through, I guess, 14. Sometime later, when King Ahasuerus' rage had cooled down, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, what was decided against her. The king's personal attendant suggested, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in each province of his kingdom, so that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem at the fortress of Susa. Put them under the supervision of Haggai, the king's eunuch, keeper of the women, and give them the required beauty treatments. Then the young woman who pleases the king will become queen instead of Vashti. This suggestion pleased the king, and he did accordingly. In the fortress of Susa, there was a Jewish man named Mordecai, son of Jahir, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the other captives when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took King Jeconiah of Judah into exile. Mordecai was the legal guardian of his cousin Hadassah, that is Esther, because she had no father or mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. When her father and mother died, Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter. When the king's command and edict became public knowledge, and when many young women were gathered at the fortress of Susa under Haggai's supervision, Esther was taken to the palace, under the supervision of Haggai, keeper of the women. The young women pleased him and gained his favor, so that he accelerated through the process of beauty treatments and special diets that she received. He assigned 7 hand-picked female servants to her from the palace and transferred her and her servants to the harem's best quarters. Esther did not reveal her ethnicity or her family background, because Mordecai had ordered her not to make them known. Every day, Mordecai took a walk in front of the harem's courtyard to learn how Esther was doing and to see what's happening to her. During the year before each young woman's turn to go into King Ahasuerus, the harem regulation required her to receive beauty treatments with oil of myrrh for 6 months, and then with perfumes and cosmetics for another 6 months. When the young woman would go to the king, she was given whatever she requested to take with her from the harem to the palace. She would go in the evening, and in the morning she would return to a second harem under the supervision of the king's eunuch Shaashgaz, keeper of the concubines. She never went to the king again unless he desired her and summoned her by name. So he gets back from his failed military campaign, and he doesn't have a queen. What is the suggestion that is made to him? This is going to be the pattern. A suggestion is going to be made to the king, and it's, sure, we'll go with that. It's almost like he follows whatever the first suggestion is, or at least that's the way it's presented in this book. And let's make a search for all the beautiful virgins in the kingdom, because that's what the king deserves. And not only that, let him be given beauty treatments for a full year before she ever sees the king in this. And we're introduced to Mordecai in chapter 2. What is Mordecai's background? What tribe is he from? He's from Benjamin. And how did he get to Susa?
He had been with the captives when Jeconiah was taken from Judah.
Yeah, Kish was. So Kish had a son Shimei, who had a son Jahir, who had a son named Mordecai. So it would be his father, grandfather, great-grandfather had been taken. So this is past the point where a lot of Israelis have even, Jewish people have even gone back, but now this is the still in Babylon area that this is happening. So it is, he's presumably never lived in Jerusalem or in Judea, but he would be the fourth generation from the person who had been taken into exile.
Just a question, would that work out, time-wise? I know my Bible there in 6 has Kish in italics and says literally the word is who. So I was thinking that it was Mordecai telling his background who had been carried away from him. So I don't know how the time would work out.
If it is Mordecai, he would be really old. I guess he could have been a kid, and then he'd be in his 80s and 90s, and like talking about what he is capable of doing in this book, it doesn't make a lot of sense. To me, it makes more sense that he's a younger man who has a brother who has a really young daughter, or a cousin as an uncle. So he would be about perhaps even close to Esther's age, but he raises her as his own daughter, so maybe a little bit older than she is. But that would be my guess. So that many women were gathered at the fortress, and in chapter 2, when we see Esther, she does whatever she's told in chapter 2, and we see her character growing as we go throughout the story. In chapter 2, Mordecai tells her, don't tell these people who you are or your family background. So she doesn't. And then and she goes along with all of the beauty treatments and presumably would eat all of the food and things. I think we should see a contrast here between her and another group of exiles who were put into a situation where they were being groomed for a purpose, where they were given the king's choice foods and things, but yet instead of keeping their ethnicity quiet and just going along with the plan, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what did they do? Is they kept to their principles, they kept honoring God, they mentioned God right off the bat, and it's just very different from where you see Esther. The Esther is just doing whatever she's told to do in chapter 2, but that's one thing that we're going to see her story and her character develop and grow as we go through this book. Yes.
Other people came.
Certainly.
He had his own.
He's a very powerful person. And like when the next woman would go to him in the evening and then she'd come back in the morning and she would go to a different harem, like we don't have to imagine what a pagan king would be doing with these women overnight. Right? They're not having coffee and discussing politics. And so when Esther is now called in verse 15, it is now her time to go in. So let's read 15 through 18. Someone reading that? Tommy, do you mind reading that?
Sure. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into the royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all of the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his friends and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity.
All right. So when it came to her choice of whatever she could bring from the harem with her, what does she do? She does whatever Haggai tells her to do. Like in this chapter, she does whatever she's told. Like we have a question on what do we learn about the godly character of Esther in verse 15? I'm not sure that I see necessarily a godly character in verse 15. She does what the head of all of the mistresses, the head of the harem tells her to do. He follows his advice, and she goes to Ahasuerus, and presumably would follow the same procedure. She'd go with him at night and come back the next morning. And the king loved Esther more than all the other women. She won more favor and approval from him that day than any of the other virgins. And he placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. So now Esther has been put in the queenship of the whole province, and still not showing who she is. And so far, she's been incredibly passive. And now, the king throws another banquet. This is the third party that we've seen in the book. It was Esther's banquet, and he even freed the provinces from tax payments and gave them gifts worthy of the king's bounty. And then the next section, verses 19 through 23, is something that's thrown into the story that later is going to be impactful. What do they call that in movies? It's a foreshadowing a bit. It's so you have this story in 19 through 23. Lee, do you mind reading?
Sure.
That?
When the virgins were gathered a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther still did not reveal her family background or her ethnicity, as Mordecai had directed. She obeyed Mordecai's orders, as she always had while he raised her. During those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance, became infuriated and planned to assassinate King Ahasuerus. When Mordecai learned of the plot, he reported it to Queen Esther, and she told the king on Mordecai's behalf. When the report was investigated and verified, both men were hanged on the gallows. This event was recorded in the historical record in the king's presence.
All right. So this, we have a note, the historical background here. The idea of gallows is literally tree. The idea of gallows likely involves the wrong imagery of someone being hanging by their neck, but most likely it would be someone who would be impaled up on a pole and displayed that way. And that's what happens to these people in verse 23. Why were they killed? Is because they were in a plot to harm the king. Who were they? These people in verse 21.
Two of the king's eunuchs.
Yeah. So you think of two of the king's eunuchs. You think about somebody that would be that close to the king is someone who would have, they have motive, but they also have opportunity. They would be someone who would be close to the king, would have the ability to harm him, sleep, or otherwise. But Mordecai overhears this plot, and he tells Esther, and Esther tells the king, and it is investigated, and they are taken care of. This is going to come back into play later on in chapter 6. Anybody have any comments or questions on chapter 2? I know that there's a lot of books that when they study Esther, they say, oh, here's the godliness of Vashti. Here's the godliness of Esther in chapter 2. I'm not sure that I see it, but what I do see is a growth in character through the book that is certainly worth valuing. But I'm not sure that I see high moral value in Esther right now. Like, Esther still had a choice. when she had a choice to be brought before the king to have relations with a man that wasn't Jewish, that she wasn't married to, did she have a choice in that? Yeah. I mean, did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have a choice to either bow down or not bow down? Yeah, they had a choice. There were consequences for that choice, but they had the choice to not do as the king had commanded. Could Esther have not done as the king had commanded? Should she not have done what the king commanded?
Yes.
I'd say yes. She shouldn't have just gone along with this scheme. Yes, sir.
Could this be these women that were brought? Of course, polygamy was very prevalent in this day, and that the women that were brought were going to be his wives, concubines. It uses the word concubines in the New King James Version. They were wives.
Okay.
You had your wife from which the children would be born, who would inherit. Then you had your concubines as well, but they were all wives. So I'm thinking this could be, they're married. They're marrying the king here, and then Esther probably viewed it that way. Not that she was entering into a relationship with somebody that she was not married to.
That is a good way to look at this. That very well may be just entering into a polygamy type relationship. It's still someone who's not a Jew, like that who she should be marrying. But is this a wise thing to do? Was this a righteous thing to do? What type of character do we see from her in chapter 2? I'm not sure we can say a whole lot about that. So did anybody have any comments on that? We're now introduced to another main character in chapter 3. So if you see, if you were to plot, the rise and fall of characters through the book, Haman is when he's introduced, he's already pretty powerful, but his reputation and his power is only going to grow and grow and grow. And at the same time, Mordecai is the cousin / adopted father of the queen, but he's going to fall and fall and fall until we get to a pivotal moment where everything's going to flip, and then they're going to go the opposite direction. In the biggest idea of irony, it comes in chapter 6. So let's take a look at chapter 3. So after all this took place, King Ahasuerus honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. He promoted him in rank and gave him a higher position than all the other officials. His entire royal staff at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, because the king had commanded this to be done for him. But Mordecai would not bow down or pay homage. The members of the royal staff at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" When they had warned him day after day, and he still would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see if Mordecai's action would be tolerated, since he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down or paying homage, he was filled with rage. And when he learned of Mordecai's ethnic identity, it seemed repugnant to Haman to do away with Mordecai alone. He planned to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout Ahasuerus' kingdom. In the first month, the first year of Nisan, in King Ahasuerus' 12th year, the pur, that is, the lot, was cast before Haman each day and each month, and it fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Then Haman informed the king Ahasuerus, "There is one ethnic group scattered throughout the peoples and every province of your kingdom, keeping themselves separate. Their laws are different from everyone else's laws, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. And if the king approves, let an order be drawn up authorizing their destruction. And I will pay 375 tons of silver to the officials for deposit in the royal treasury." The king removed his signet ring from his hand, gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Then the king told Haman, "The money and the people are given to you to do with as you see fit, The royal scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and the order was written exactly as Haman commanded, and it was intended for the royal satraps, the governors of each of the provinces. The officials of each ethnic group were written for each province in his own script, to each ethnic group in its own language. It is written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the royal signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to each of the royal provinces, telling the officials to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jewish people, young and old, women and children, and plunder their possessions on a single day, the 13th day of Adar in the 12th month. The copy of the text, issued as law throughout every province, was distributed to all the people so that they might be ready for that day. The couriers left, spurred on by the royal command, and the law was issued in the fortress of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, while the city of Susa was in confusion. So, you know how I mentioned that the king makes two decisions on his own in the book of Esther? The first one is, there's no restrictions on drinking. The second one is in chapter 3, verse 1. What's the other decision that he makes? Then he promotes Haman. Is that a wise decision on his part? What we see from, and not only does he promote him, but he gives him a really high position over all the other officials, so Haman becomes second in command essentially, and everyone bowed down and paid homage to Haman except Mordecai. I watched YouTube videos. Your husband does a lot of YouTube videos. Are there some negative comments on his videos? I'm sure. Every YouTube video has a negative comment occasionally. Or the vast majority of them are positive, I assume, but occasionally, and if you read the negative comments, that those negative comments can really get to you. To me, that's what Haman is doing. It's like he sees everyone obeying him except for one guy, and it infuriates him, and he's so petty. And he not only wants Mordecai punished, to what length does he hate Mordecai because of Mordecai's rebellion against this king's order to bow down, not to the king, but to Haman?
He had the signet ring. Now, he's really up there. So, he thinks that he deserves this.
Absolutely. Haman thinks he deserves this authority and power, that he's given the signet ring. What was it, Mr. Dare?
I forgot now.
Oh,
Sorry.
He hates Mordecai so much, he's not willing just to cause Mordecai harm. All the Jews need to die because of what this one Jew has done to me. How dare he do this to me? Doesn't he know who I am? Do you see how much pride there is in this? What humility does Haman have? Absolutely none. There's no world in which someone would not bow down to the second in command. But Mordecai refuses to. And there is a very interesting detail. What type of, when it says Haman, he is son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. What is an Agagite?
He's an enemy of the Jews from the center.
Yeah, where are the Agagites from?
The Amalekites.
Yeah. What connection does the tribe of Benjamin and Mordecai have with the Amalekites?
Saul didn't take him out.
Right. God told Saul to utterly wipe out the Amalekites. What tribe was Saul from? He was from Benjamin. It's Saul the Benjamite refuses to utterly wipe out the Amalekites. And now here is a descendant of the Amalekite and a descendant of Benjamin clashing again. That, to me, is very interesting. Well, we'll pick up again in chapter 3 next time.
Is everyone back? Number 366. Number 366, this will be a song of encouragement. No soul, rescue the perishing, care for the dying, snatch them in bed.